All right, this is the lecture that finishes up section 8.3, although I reserve the right to do a few more examples from it later. This is for the day October 20, Tuesday lectures, and we're going to get into 8.3, the second part. And by way of review, let's take a look at what we did at the end of the class last time. 8.3, it's about fair division. 8.4 will be about the electoral college and other situations like that. The adjusted winner procedure is what happens when you're trying to divide up, say, an inheritance or just some prizes or something amongst, a couple of people. So each of two people makes a bid totaling 100 points, divides it up the way they think it should be done. And the initial division of items, each item goes to the higher bidder. Tied items are held for now. The higher score is to the point leader, and the lesser score is the trader. If it happens already be a tie, you're done. But that's unusual, but it could happen. Now, items that were tied, say 10 points each or 5 points each, go to the leader. It may be temporary, but it's just a way of putting them somewhere, and then it gets divided up. But if you keep it kind of in limbo, it would never get really divided very easily. So anyway, we sometimes we'll calculate the leader-trader ratios. Occasionally you don't really need to do this, but for each item belonging to the leader, calculate the ratio. Of course, if they only have one item, there's not going to be much to do here. We do see an example like that. So then we transfer some items from leader to trader, and we transfer them from the leader to the trader to kind of even it out. They should have the same score in order from the smallest ratio to the largest ratio. And so we make sure the lead doesn't change, but once the lead becomes changed, it's called the critical item, and that's the one that has to be split up. Now, the disadvantage of this method is sometimes it doesn't make sense to split it up. Like, how do you get a third of a car, for example? But there are other items like cash or timeshares that can be split up fairly easily. So let's get to a different example than we had before. Here we have, from an inheritance, a condo, 1962 GT Hawk, a silver set, and then Dad's cap and gown, went to Yale, I guess. And so we see how the items go. And initially, John gets the Hawk. Why? Because they bid more on it. And so let's get this back and put a check mark there. Gets the silver. Yep. 20 to 15 on each of those cases. And the cap and gown, 10 to 5. John gets 3 items. However, Faye right now has the big item, the vacation condominium. Clearly, they both put a lot of points on it, and Faye is the winner of that. And that's the only one she has, so there's no need for ratios. If we were to start pulling stuff away from her to make it even, which it's not. By the way, right now, John has 50 points, and Faye clearly has 65, and this is the only one she has, so there's not much reason to do a ratio. It would be 65 over 50, that would be 1.3, but since it's the only ratio there is, that part could be easily skipped. So her condo is the critical item. That's the part that'll be split up, and yes, that can be split. We'll show you that in a minute. So how do we get this formula going? Well, we look at the points. John had 50 points, as we just said. Faye has 65 points. Now, looking especially at Faye and what she's giving up, the only item she had, her favorite item, was the 65. And a part of that 65 will be going over to John to make it fair, so to speak. And it's worth 65 points. The idea is to find out how much of that will go over to John. Now, he put only 50 points on it, so his coefficient there is a little bit different, but that shouldn't matter very much. We can show a little bit of algebra here, and I guess I'll do that over here. As we solve for P, I guess I would add 65P to each side. Maybe I can squeeze it in right here. So as we add in 65P, I'll capitalize the P. Then we can see that we have 50 still on the left side, 115P on the left side, equaling just the number 65, since, of course, these P terms were opposites of each other and were designed to cancel out. So we just have the number 65 on the right side. Subtract 50, and some people do this very fast, some people take a little time, but take whatever time you need. So P, as they say, will equal the ratio of 15 over 115. If you use a calculator to 2 decimal places, 0.13, which is 13%. 13% of the condo from Faye, but Faye gets 100 minus that, or 87% ownership of the condo. And because condos can be split up, say, by weeks, could even be done by days, I suppose. But if you take a look at what happens in the calculation here, 13% times 52 weeks is a number that's pretty close to 7 weeks. And so John would get 7 weeks, and then 52 minus 7 is 45 weeks. Let's not worry about those leap years or other years where there's 53 Sundays, let's say. Let's just call it 52 weeks, and that would be good enough. And that's basically how that could be split up. Now, one difficulty is that sometimes you get into areas that cannot be split up, as we mentioned before, and then perhaps another method could be used instead. Here's another one. What's a fair share for this type of scenario? Use the adjusted winner procedure to fairly divide up the following items. For another example, so they've each bid on a laptop, some DVDs, MP3 player, a tablet, and a TV. And you can see they came up with completely different situations. They both add up to 100, though. You can double check that, but yes, they both add up to 100, which is important. And then we just kind of go down the list and see who won, at least initially. Ann won the laptop. It's a tie on the DVDs. Let's wait on that. MP3 player, Ann got the winning bid there. The tablet, Ann really got the winning bid there. But the TV, Becky got that one. So we have those. Now we can see what total points there are. And as you add up the points that Ann has with the check marks, Ann gets those 3 items for a total of 87 points. But Becky only got the 40 points for the TV. This is the points that they've already assigned, so it's really the value they put on it. There's no predetermined value on these things. Now, just to put it somewhere, the leader gets the tie for now, and so she gets the DVD as well. And that means she gets 87 plus 5, or 92. Now, because there's several items that Becky, or actually Ann, would have to give up, because Ann right now is the leader, so Ann has to give up stuff to make it fair. And so that's what's going to happen to make it, to balance the books, so to speak. So yeah, we look at all the ratios and see what's going on. As far as what Ann owns, she owned the laptop. That's a 50 to 40 ratio, 1.25. The DVDs was a tie, so of course that ratio is a 1. And then the MP3 player, well, it was 6 to 5, or a ratio of 1.2. And the ratio for the tablet, really high ratio of 3.1. So it turns out that we go through the list and we go, let's take a look at the next slide. The DVDs and the MP3 player are transferred. So yeah, we go in order from lowest to highest. So this one goes first. That one goes second. And we kind of look at the points. Let's see what they've said on the next slide. So they're saying that Ann's score is 81 and Becky's is 50. So how did that occur? Well, Ann, A for Ann, had 92, and then she gave up the DVDs. That's 5 points. She gave up the MP3 player. That's another 6 points for a total so far of 81. I don't think the lead has changed yet. Let's look at Becky, B, and she starts with only 40. And she has different values assigned, although the DVDs was a tie. But then she only gets 5 points for the MP3. So right now it's 81 to 50. Okay, if we were to take care of the third one, that laptop has a lot of points. You start tossing that around, and Ann would give up 50. That's 31, but Becky would gain 40. Well, the point is, no matter what the points are, this is not even close. There's been a change. You can read this down here. There's definitely been a change, and so that part needs to be carved up, so to speak. Now that we found what goes too far in this division, we see how far into that little path we go. And this is where the algebra kicks in just a little bit. Okay, so this said we had that. So now we just go ahead and say that the laptop is what's called the critical item. That's the one that's carved up, even though it may not be practical to carve it up. But let's get to that later on. So we'll start off with Becky's score plus a proportion of Becky's bid. Well, going back to the table, just to refresh our memory, Becky's score as of this moment, before the critical value was, not really done anyway. So Becky would have 50 points, Ann would have 81 points, so we can put that in. And then Becky, in terms of Becky, the laptop, the critical item, is a 40-point item. So we're going to take a part of 40 for Becky and then subtract a part of Ann's, which is now 50 points. So that accounts for the difference in the points. Becky gets to add 40 for every point we change, but on the other hand, Ann loses 50 because she valued it higher. So that's where, although they tend to be similar, I guess, sometimes they are not. Well, now it becomes just algebraic to set up the equation. So we have the points already, 50 and 81, and Becky will gain 40%, so to speak, of Becky's bid, and then Ann's will lose 50% of the P value. So as we go ahead and add 50 to each side, we would get 90. So it's really hard to sneak this in, but okay, it turns off every so often. So add in 50p to each side, and 40 plus 50p is 90p, and add in 50p to each side. They're doing all the algebra pretty fast. Some of you are probably pretty good at this, but if we subtracted 50 on the left side pretty much at the same time, or maybe in a separate step, the 50s would cancel out. 40p plus 50p is 90p, as I'm pointing, and then 81 minus 50 would be 31, and then the p's would also cancel out, the 50 minus 50 plus. So then this is pretty much a third, a little bit more than a third. As you divide by 90, of course, to get what p would be, this is in a proportion form. It's not put in a percent yet, but that's very easy to do, as I'm sure you know. Just multiply by 100, slide that decimal over 2 places to the nearest percentage place. It would be 34% of the laptop. So they all get what we had said they were going to get. Becky gets DVDs, tapes, MP3 player, the TV, so that's 4 things, and more than a third of the laptop. So Ann gets a tablet, and the remaining, say, almost 2/3 of the laptop, of 2/3 is 67%. This is as fair as it can be for a party of 2, considering, of course, that neither party changes their minds about point allocation, which is just not allowed. There are some problems with this. Parties of 3 or more are not accounted for here. Critical items being non-dividable, what would it take to share the laptop where one of them gets it 2/3 of the time, the other one gets it 1/3 of the time, or 34% of the time? That may or may not be practical. If they live in the same city, sure, but if they're different states, maybe not. So that is a bit of an issue. Okay, we have a Naster procedure, but I did want to work on a couple of other examples first. So let me see if I can squeeze it into the introductory slide. The book does offer a couple of examples, and just to make sure that we have a long enough time period to show you examples, let me try the Try It Yourself 8.15 from the book. And if I have a little room here, maybe I can do some erasing. Well, I guess that's too much trouble. Yeah, I guess I can do that. So let's see. Wrong pen. Keep the same pen I was using. And if I hit the eraser, okay, stroke eraser, yeah, there it goes. Now I'm going to get back to a particular color. How about that one? So if you have your book or ebook open, you can see that for various items, John had, for the vacation condo, 60 points. I'll just say condo. I should type this in, I suppose, and I'll just say the car, 15 points. A silver set, I'll just say silver. That is 15 points that he put in, and then 10 points for the cap. I'll just say cap and gown, cap, good enough. That's J for John, and F for Faye puts in different bids, of course. Only 45 for the condo, puts in 20 for the car, 20 for the silver, and 15 for the cap. So there's some clear winners here at first, and at first John gets the condo with 60 points, and Faye gets the car, the silver, the cap, for a total of 55 points. So right now, John has 60 and Faye has 55. Now that's close, but it's still not done. There's no tie there, so that's how that goes. So it turns out John's ahead, but he only has one item. Not much need for a ratio here. That ratio is 60 over 45, which I guess is 1.33, but that's not important. That's the only thing he has, so that becomes the critical value. Critical item, I should say. So the condo is what they call the critical item. That's the one that has to be split up. critical item. So to make it fair, to get it closer to somewhere between 55 and 60, which is not necessarily halfway, by the way. It could be a little less than halfway, a little more than halfway. So we have to come up with a formula that would do that. So looking in terms of John, or in terms of Faye, let's do Faye first. Let's do the one that we have to add first. Faye has 55, so I'll put a little F here. She has 55 points, and then she needs to add into the condo amount. And that's going to be 45 points, because she only put 45 for the condo. And we'll set that equal to John. Put a little J over here to remind you. It's supposed to be a J. And he has 60 points, but he's going to lose some points. And he values the condo at 60 points each. So it's minus 60p. So we set that equation equal to each other, and we figure out what we would have. And I'll show a little bit of the algebra. The book doesn't seem to show, but it's not too difficult unless you haven't done it in a while. Okay, so right now we have 55 plus 105p. I, of course, added the 60p so I could subtract it away from the right side. Just the first one I noticed. And I've got the p on the left side, which I'd prefer. So that means the 55 has to go over to the other side. This is going to be a very small ratio because it was already pretty much a tie. So we have 105p, sorry. Got the fine print for a while. And 105p equals 5 means that if we look down here, p would equal the number 5 divided by 105, which is a very, very small number. And actually, we have, so that's 105. Okay, so 5 over 105 is very close to 5%. Let me just double check that really fast. Reciprocal of 21 is 0.0476. Yeah, it's close enough to 5%. So I'll just call that 5%. And that means that they get what they expect. Trouble is, there's a division of the condo. John will have to give up 5% of the condo in order to be fair. So that's basically how it goes. So 5% of 52 weeks, that's not very much. It's 52 divided by 20 approximately. That's about 2.5 weeks that he has to give up to his compatriot, sister, whatever it may be. So don't worry about carving that part up. But anyway, you see that Faye gets those 3 items, the car, the silver, and the cap, and 5% of the condo, whereas John gets simply 95% of the condo, and that's how that example could go. Okay, so let's move on to the next example. We do have another one. We'll see how the time goes. I might have time to do another one of these. Okay, here's the Naster procedure. It's a method of dividing up items amongst several parties. Does not require dividing ownership of items. Procedure is based on having the parties assign monetary value, not points, but this is actual money value. This is their bid. This is a sealed bid. That's another name for it. Method of sealed bids, as the book says. Okay, so say there's just a car. 4 people involved are each entitled to 1/4 of the car. Maybe it's an inheritance. Each person places a bid, and each will wind up with a value of at least 1/4 of the bid. Now, that might be surprising. You might think it'd be exactly 1/4, but actually, no. That's going to be the minimum they get. Maybe more. Usually is more. So suppose the bids are as follows. A bids $30,000. Ben bids $23,000. Caleb bids $28,000, and Dan bids $25,000. We don't really have a way of determining what the car is worth. It just, amongst those 4 people, they come up with something. Anyway, the highest bidder, Abe, gets the car because he bid more. But that's the entire estate, and he's only entitled to 1/4. So he has to make good with cash for the rest of the people. So he has to put the remaining 3/4 of it into a kitty. So based on what since he set the standard, basically, he gets to keep 1/4 of this outright. But 3/4 of it he doesn't get to keep. In other words, he has to pay the other 3 people a fair share in order to make it fair for everybody. So you either get the car and pay out some money for the privilege, or you just sit back and get the cash, but no car. And it does have a lot to do with what you bid. The more you bid, the more cash you get. Trouble is, if you bid too much, you win, and maybe you didn't want to win, and suddenly you got to pay a bunch of cash out. So it's kind of like a game of chicken almost. You got to get to a certain point, but not maybe too far. So it does work out to be fair in the long run for everybody, although it may not seem like it at the time to some people. But that's another story for another day. Okay, well, he has to put in this amount into a kitty. It isn't paid directly yet, but it will be paid out. So each of the others withdraw 1/4 of what they assigned as the value of the car. So this is what they're going to be getting. So this, first of all, the $22,500 is going into a kitty. It's kind of a holding place. So Ben will get this much cash, $57.50, 1/4 of what he bid, $23,000. 1/4 of $28,000, that's easy. That's $7,000. Caleb gets that amount because he bid the second most, and then Dan gets $62.50. So that's what he's going to get. Now the thing is, you add up all that money, and that's only going to be $19,000. Oh, well, what happened to the other part of the money? There's around $3,000 that isn't accounted for. What do we do with that? Well, as you might guess, I don't know, you might want to split that part up, and that's what's going to happen. As we subtract the two, you do get, as I show a little bit of work here, $22,500 minus the $900. There's $3,500 left over, so I'll just go ahead and tell you that. So that leaves a kitty of $3,500 that still has to be divided equally among the 4 people, not just 3, but all 4 of them are entitled to that portion, that portion that has not been distributed yet. So each person at the end, this will be the last step, receives 1/4 of the value he assigned to the car, plus the kitty. How about that? So the overbid kind of brings the price over, and then we kind of make up the difference here. And they have it kind of like in accounting. I've never been super fond of accounting, but we can kind of see how they've decided to summarize the transaction in this table. First of all, Abe. Well, he bid $30,000. He owns 1/4 of that outright, but 3/4 of it, $22,500, he has to pay back to the other people. Now, the nice thing for everybody on the way out is they get to add $875 to their total at the end. So he actually has to pay he gets the car, first of all. That's number one. But then he has to pay out $21,625. And that's going to be to the other 3 people, and it will be divided up, but not completely equally. And we already looked at this part just a minute ago, and $57.50 for Ben, but he gets a bonus. They all get a bonus of $875 at the end because of the unallocated part of the kitty. Caleb gets the most cash, gets $7,825, and then you add $875 to Dan, he gets $7,125. These numbers together do add up to $21,625. It's not divided up a third. It is based on the bids they had. And the kitty is just sort of a bonus for everybody. I'm not quite sure if a kitty could be negative. I'm pretty sure it can't be. And I'm not even sure if it could be 0. I think there's always going to be some sort of positive amount of money there, maybe small, maybe large, but that's another story. Take a look at the kitty, how the kitty started with 0, temporarily ballooned up to $22,500, and then after we did the initial designation of the cash, there's $3,500 left over, and that's been split up. As we say, we divided by 4 because they all are entitled to their fair share of that extra money. And now the kitty's back down to 0, where it belongs. The kitty is not going to keep the money. No cat food today. So this is kind of a summary here, which we'll take a look and see how it goes. Each person bids a secret dollar amount for each item to be divided. They're sealed bids. For each item separately, the item, certainly the easy part, everybody knows about this, is given to the person who bid the most. They're not talking about ties here, so I don't think that that's something that we're going to cover here. So that's the winner. The winner contributes the difference of their vote and his or her share of the item to a kitty. So that's like the 3/4 or 2/3 or 4/5, how many other people are around. So the kitty temporarily gets a bunch of money. But the person does get a certain part that they already own out of the item they're bidding on. So that part they don't have to pay back. They just get to keep their 1/4 of the car, for example. Now, step 3, those who don't win, you notice you have the winners versus the non-winners, withdraw their share of each of the bids, whether it's a 1/3 or a 1/4 or a 1/5, whatever it might be. This time it was a 1/3 because they're the non-winners. There are 3 non-winners but 4 total people, so that's important to realize. Sometimes those numbers get mixed up. And there should be some money left in the kitty. I don't think we can get to a perfect 0. And it's divided equally amongst all of the bidders. So all bidders. So I better say all to emphasize that. Okay, I've got other examples I can work. Maybe I'll save that for a chapter review or something along those lines. Because now we have a lengthy next example. Let's see if we can get through it. And I've got another one hot on the heels of it, but I don't know if I want to do it today. Here we have a family farm to be divided, and there are three major parts of the farm. They're bid separately on by three family members, the ones that apparently are the people involved. So Julie, Ann, and Steve all bid on the farmhouse, the wheat fields, and the cattle operations. And so we'd like to divide up the farm equally so each of them get the same amount based especially on what they bid. Notice these are not points anymore. These are actual dollar amounts. So we have to be careful with that. There'll be a kitty again. This is just a kind of another layer on the prior example. This is still part of the master procedure, as they call it. So each part of the farm is given to the highest bidder, and that's the easy part. Okay, what about the farmhouse? Julie bid $120,000, Steve bid $75,000, and Ed bid $60,000. Julie is the winner of the farmhouse. Wheat fields, another clear winner here. Ann bid $450,000, Steve $390,000, and Julie $210,000. So Ann wins the wheat fields. And then cattle operations, Ann bid $750,000, Steve bids $600,000, and Julie bids $300,000. So Ann wins both of those. It isn't a third. Ann's bid on a lot. She's put a lot more money into the bidding. That means she'll probably have to come up with a lot of cash too to make it even for everybody. Well, anyway, they summarize what I just said here. Steve does not get any of the farm, so that might be sad, but he will get probably a lot of cash. Maybe that's what he wanted. I don't know. But Steve did bid a lot. He came in second place on a couple of these items, second place on all three of them, but he didn't win any of them. This is not like the Borda rule or anything like that. So the divisions of each piece of the farm and its cash value follow. Please rewind this if you want, and I'll be doing another example sometime soon. This is not super long, but it isn't short either. Okay, so looking at each of the pieces of the farm one at a time. We're talking about the farmhouse first and the people involved. She bid $120,000, and she gets the farmhouse. She's entitled to a third of that. $40,000 is hers, but she has to pay the other 2/3. That's $80,000. Temporarily, the kitty gets rich. And Ann and Steve are also entitled to a third of their bids. So Ann bids $60,000. She'll get a third of it back in cash. Steve bids more. He gets even more back in cash. So it's one of those things. You bid a lot, but you get to a certain level, and maybe you bid too much and you can't afford it. That could be quite embarrassing or quite seriously a bit of problem. So you have to be realistic too. But because Steve bid more, he does get more right now, the third of his bid. He gets back in cash eventually, hopefully not too long. Well, anyway, let's take a look at how this bookkeeping process goes. Now, Julie bid on the farmhouse, and she had to give up $80,000 to the kitty. Notice how the kitty suddenly has gone up to plus $80,000. Now, Ann, of course, bid $60,000. She gets to keep from the kitty. Notice to kitty and from kitty. She gets $20,000 cash. We just said it. We're just reviewing what we just did. $20,000 to Ann, Steve, $25,000. But notice how the kitty is dropping down. This totaled up to $45,000. I'll just say $45K. And that means $35,000 right now is in the kitty. That's the part that was just not completely dealt with. It's the leftover part the kitty gets to keep for a while. So as we move along to the next slide, you can see how the other two pieces of the farm affect it. Okay, let's go to the wheat fields next. Ann won the wheat fields. She bid on that. She wins the last couple of items. So she gets that, and she's entitled to a third of that. That's hers outright. But 2/3 of it she's not entitled to. She has to be prepared to pay that out in cash. And so that's what happens. She puts $300,000 into the kitty. Now notice this was from before. This is the new stuff. The $335,000 is the total. So let's look at this one step at a time. So it goes to the kitty, $300,000. And that means the kitty to kind of balance the books with a minus 300,000, we add 300,000. So I'll just put a little plus 300K right here in case that's confusing to anybody. It might be. And so far the kitty's rolling in dough, lots and lots of money there. Temporarily, it will be down to zero before we're done, just like before, just a little bit more layered in this particular case. Well, anyway, they each get to keep a third of their bids. So Julie takes a third of her bid, which works out to be 70,000. Steve bid quite a bit more, so he gets about double what Julie gets. On first glance, it doesn't look fair, but if you look more carefully, it really is fair. Well, anyway, as that part gets distributed, so she gets a third of her bid, he gets a third of her bid, but Anne gets all the wheat fields, so she has to give up 2/3 of her bid. That's the difference. She has to pay out 2/3 of what she bid, which is the actual price, and yet the others get a third of what they bid. Not the same as Anne. This third is based on their bids. If you put a real low bid, you're not going to get much money back because you didn't value it very much. This puts a lot of responsibility. This is where consulting with an expert or a lawyer might be a good idea, unless you just want to wing it and take a chance. But anyway, total removed from the kitty, as you know, they get paid their third, is 200,000. But the kitty can definitely afford it. So subtract 200. I'll just say 200K. Kitty is now down to only 135,000. Not too bad, but that has to be dealt with. So somehow it's going to be made up at the last step here. But let's take a look at the third part of the farm, the cattle operations. Anne won that one too. She bid very high amount. She earned, or she actually gets a third of that based on her value. That's the part she doesn't have to pay back because that's hers. But she does have to pay back 2/3 of it. 2/3 is 500,000. That's a lot of money. So Julie and Steve will take from that a third of their respective bids, which of course are lower. And so because it's lower, they'll get a third of the bid, which in Julie's case is 100,000. Steve will get a third of his bid. Nice round numbers, I like that. 200,000. And the total removed from the kitty is 300,000. Let's take a look at how the table is going so far. I'll start with Anne. This part of it, she got the cattle operations. She had to give up 2/3 of it in order to keep it. So she has to pay out 500,000. And so, okay, the kitty from before had 135,000. So I'll just say this is from the last slide. That's not a magic number, just happened from before. So temporarily, the kitty's number swells by adding 500,000, because we have to add 500K. 135,000 for the kitty, add 500,000 to the kitty, 635,000 to the kitty. And then the kitty only pays out like less than half of that. The kitty, as we said a little bit ago, was going to pay out only 300,000 from this. So they do. And Julie gets 100,000, Steve gets 200,000. But the kitty still has a third of $1,000,000 in there, 335,000. So I'll go ahead and put minus 300K just to keep a focus on the kitty. On the next slide, they're going to tell you what happens to this 335,000. Very similar to the last example, we can see how that goes. So I'll go back to the table in just a second, because this is what's left, a very large amount left in the kitty. That means to the nearest dollar, we're not going to go to the nearest penny here, they all get kind of a bonus, not just 800 some dollars. It's going to be 110,000 some dollars, 111,000 almost, so or 112,000. So that's what they get to get is kind of the leftover part. The kitty doesn't get to keep anything. It's just a holding area. So we basically look at all these numbers and see how they can be totaled together. They'll do that on the next page. I guess I'll start off with let's see what they say first. Julie. First start with Julie. She got the farmhouse and cash totaling minus 80,000 plus 70,000 plus 100,000 plus 111,000 and change. And let's see how that came about. We have the 100,000 that just happened. This is borrowing from previous slides. So she had to pay because whenever you get something, you have to pay. So that's the difference from a couple slides ago where she had to pay $80,000 to keep the farmhouse. That was the cheaper item. But then she got, because she lost the last two bids, she got 70,000 and 100,000 for the last two bids. And plus the bonus, I'll just call this a bonus, the leftover amount. But she doesn't do too badly. She gets over $200,000 and a farmhouse. Okay. Well, Ann's the one that was the big spender. She won the wheat fields with the big minus sign because she had to pay 2/3 of it. Cattle operations, another big minus sign. And well, she did get paid a little bit from the first item that she lost. She got paid only 20,000 there, and of course the bonus that everybody gets. She put all that together, and she better have some cash there in order to afford all this stuff. In order to be fair to her brother and sister or whatever it may be, she has to come up with that kind of cash. That could be an issue in some cases, of course. So he's got to be able to pay out that much. Now, what about Steve? Well, Steve did not pay out any cash. All his numbers are pluses, but he doesn't get any property though. He got 25,000 for the first bid, 130,000 for the second bid, 200,000 for the third bid. All this on the previous slides and also in your book if you're looking at the book at the same time. And of course the bonus. So he just walks away with a bunch of cash. 446,667. Now, is that a full 1/3, 1/3, 1/3? Based on what they had said, what the values of the properties were worth, yes, that would be fair. Now, if some other, say, dealer came along and said, oh, this is what it's really worth, then it may not be fair. Sometimes you overbid, sometimes you underbid, and the idea is just to hit the optimum sweet spot, which may be very difficult to do. Since we do have a couple of extra minutes at least, let me go ahead and take a look at that problem. Finally, I've worked it out a couple of times, but it never showed up on these slides because I wasn't recording very well. My memory was really, really low. So I did advertise this one, and being that it's political times and all, I was going to look at problem 8.1, number 23, one I've referred to a couple times, but let's take a look at it. I don't think I've worked this out. If I have, I apologize. I don't think I have, though. There were 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans, and one of them switched, and suddenly 49 Republicans, and that person became an independent, so I'll just say one independent. And that was the makeup in 2001, not that long ago. And then we have the Shapley-Shubik index. This is the one where order matters, and which one's the swing vote. So I'll just say SS index. And before, when it was 50-50, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I'll just put it over here. 50-50, it was an obvious call. There really is no swing voter except for the last voter, and so each one of them wins half of the time. So you could have DR, and R is the swing vote, or you could have RD, and D is the swing vote. There are only two instances, and each one gets one, so each one gets an index of 50-50, just as you thought it would be. Nothing surprising in this very easy example, but when even one vote switches, it's surprising how much the influence measured by the Shapley-Shubik index changes. So let's look at the permutations involved and see which one's the swing vote. DRI, DIR, RID, RDI. Let me get over here, and I'll just go underneath here. And I'll start with I and go to DR, and then IRD. I usually go in alphabetical order. This time I did not do that. So looking at the votes and which one gets to a majority, quota, none of them get to a quota by themselves. None of them have a majority by themselves, because if they did, there wouldn't be much to calculate. It'd be very simple. But D doesn't make it, but R does. That gets to 99, and the I doesn't matter at all. So the swing vote, so I put down swing, would be the R in this case. How about DIR? Well, D gets 50 as I go to the second list, and one gets to be independent. So the independent is actually the one that pushes it to 51, which is then a majority. So remember, we're voting in order. So the order matters. I'll put that down to remind you of that one. The first index they give does not take into account the order. Then we go to Republican, Independent, Democrat, the third one. And Republican 49, Independent, one more is 50. That's not a majority. You have to get all the way to D to get to the swing vote. And that's, of course, all of the votes. How about RDI? Well, in the fourth one, R is 49, then D is 50 more. 99 is definitely a majority. So it looks like D, the one that swung the vote, is the swing vote there. What about IDR? Well, I, of course, only has one vote, so that's not swinging very much. And then the D gets to 50. That's 51. That's enough. And then we go IRD, and this is one that's funny because you've got 1 for I, you've got 49 for R. That's not enough. You got to go all the way to D to get to the swing vote. So now we notice, we compute all these, D is a swing vote 4 out of 6 times, which is rounded to the nearest percent, 67%. That's 2/3. And then Republican gets the swing vote 1 out of 6 times, and an independent 1 out of 6 times. Both of those rounded, of course, to the nearest percent, 17% each. Now, the independent, there was no independence before, so of course it went up, and that's not the main point I'm trying to make. But just with one vote switch, Democrats went from 50% to 67%, and the Republicans went from 50 all the way down to 17 just by losing one vote in an equally divided Senate. So that's something that people don't hardly ever think about, but it is a fact of life, and they are very concerned about this kind of thing. And I guess we have a fairly even Senate right now, too. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure to show that particular example, and there are others. I'll try to show extra examples each time, just beyond the ones in the book, and certainly a review. Next time in the live class, we'll get into the Electoral College a little bit and some of those apportionments, and I'll try to do a little bit more on 8.3. But I find it easier to write on the screen when I'm doing the recorded lectures, so I'll try to save the bulk of my writing for that. Maybe I can type up a slide or something and do some of that and show you some extra stuff that I could put together for you. Okay, I guess that will do it. That's the lecture for October 20, the end of 8.3. We're going to spend extra time on 8.4. Not only is it politically relevant right now, and everybody, of course, should go out and vote, assuming you're 18 or over and a U.S. citizen, which probably most of you are. Maybe some 17-year-olds, maybe some foreign nationals is possible, but for everybody else, please go out and vote. That's a patriotic thing to do, of course. All right, so that's about all I have for today. The tests are still being graded. I will get them done. Looks like I'm taping on Sunday, should be done by Monday. I am done with about half of them, but I've just run into a wall on time as what happens on the weekends. I get bogged down with lots of errands that I have to do. All right, so that's all I have, and be sure to visit me during the office hour. We'll be live back on Thursday morning in both my classes, 9 and 10:30. So we'll talk to you soon.